Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OEA bargaining team or MOU bargaining team update and Q&A. My name is Heath Madam. I'm a teacher at Oakland Technical High School, as well as a parent of 2 children at Lincoln Elementary School in OUSD.
And my name is Jamila Edwards Brooks, and I am a teacher and parent of 2 students at Montclair Elementary School.
Thanks, Jamila. It's great to see you. Jamila and I are here today to give you an update about the MOU negotiations that got underway this week and to answer any questions that you might have about how it's gone so far, the proposals, certain pieces of language in the proposals. And so the process is going to be pretty simple. We're going to give you a quick update on where things stand, and then we're going to take your questions. So if you have a question about the MOU proposal that you should have received or the negotiations in general, just type it into the YouTube comments section of the live stream. As we receive your questions, we'll do our best to answer them. If we're not able to answer your question or just don't have the answer at the moment, we'll work to get you your answer in our next update. And so with that said, I'll turn it over to Jamila to give you an update on the bargaining so far.
Thank you, Heath. So this week, OEA's bargaining team of 21 members worked on a proposed memorandum of understanding for the fall that puts student and teacher health at the center. We presented our 2 key criteria to the district. 1, that risk be low enough to safely return to school, and 2, that safety standards and precautions will be met and maintained. We sent our comprehensive draft MOU to our membership on Friday morning.
Thanks, Jamila. And so hopefully you've had a chance to review the initial proposal that we made to OUSD and provide us with some feedback. We've been reading the comments that have already been submitted, and we appreciate all those who've taken the time to voice their opinion. And so before we take questions, we just want to make a few things clear. The first is that OUSD's announcement yesterday is not final. While we agree that we have to maintain crisis distance learning in the fall, the conditions under which we're going to start the school year, they have to be bargained. They still have to be negotiated. So the negotiations process will continue. We also want to mention that while OUSD has put forward different phases for returning to in-person instruction, particularly at the elementary level, but also for some SDC and special education settings. But what they have not done, in our view, is laid out clear public health criteria that would trigger those phases, nor have they really spelled out in sufficient detail how we would maintain safe conditions inside classrooms upon any return to in-person instruction. On the flip side, OEA, our criteria, which hopefully you're familiar with by this point, demands that we have community-wide testing for all students, families, and staff, contact tracing, as well as case numbers that indicate that the virus is under control and not spreading through the community. In addition, our proposal to the district lays out in great detail all of the safety precautions and protocols that have to be in place to protect students, to protect families, and to protect staff should we return to in-person instruction. And then, so the last thing I just want to mention before we get started is that we recognize that remaining in full distance learning, crisis learning, is going to place a significant strain and hardship on parents, particularly those who are essential workers and those who have no other available childcare. And so, yeah, we recognize distance learning is far from ideal. It does not replace in-person instruction in the classroom by any means. But the safety of students, families, and educators and the community at large is paramount and has to come first. And so with cases still kind of rising and it not being clear that the situation is under control and not the safeguards in place that we feel are necessary, that's why we're advocating to maintain distance learning at this time. We do want to get back to the classroom, but we have to keep people safe. And so the last thing is just, this is an issue that impacts OEA members like Jamila and myself, both of whom have school-age children in OUSD schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamila.
At this time, we will take your questions. Remember to chat them, put them in the chat. We may not be able to answer all questions now, so if we cannot, we will answer them during our next live stream. So Heath, our first question is, how are we realistically supposed to handle the workload?
Yeah, it's a good question. And just before I answer real quick, the process we're going to use is that Jamila, who's already been working today, doing another live stream for the PIC committee, is going to ask the question. I'm going to respond first, and then she's going to go second. And just want to clarify that so folks don't feel like I'm just speaking too much. So yeah, Jamila, that's just the process we worked out. But yeah, as far as the question about, yeah, how are we going to balance the workload? I mean, it's going to be a challenge, right? Like, I think all of us recognize that, especially those of us with kids, that it's really difficult to manage your teaching or your regular workload at home when you have kids and you're trying to manage their distance learning platforms or making sure they're logging into their class or doing their work. Um, and so we're really trying to balance between the schedules of teachers and parents. We've heard from parents that want distance learning to work better for students. We've kind of tried to address that in our proposal to the district. And we're also thinking about the needs of, teachers and just parents who are caregivers as well. So just know that it's something we're thinking about and trying to figure out different scenarios to try to make this work, recognizing that there has to be some amount of synchronous learning going on in the fall. So yeah, I guess that's how I would answer it. What would you add, Jamila?
I wouldn't add anything more except to keep in mind that we have a huge team of bargaining members that are coming from various perspectives of all our rank and file members. And I would say the one thing we all have in common is a very huge workload anyway. So we're definitely going to keep that front and the center. What can we do to make this most manageable for everybody and to make it most meaningful for students as well? Okay, next question. I am very concerned that we do not have the staff and money to do the cleaning protocols outlined in the MOU. Does the district have funds to clean?
So I'm not an expert on the district's budget, but I would say that, yeah, we are advocating for increased kind of cleaning procedures in our proposal to the district. And I guess I would say that it seems like in our society, the funding is there. It's just the state and federal government has to provide school districts with the resources necessary to make this work. Yeah, I mean, I think the money, it's not an issue of whether or not the money can be there. It's just the political will to put it there to make sure that students, families, and teachers are safe. I would say if we went back in a limited capacity, it seems like maybe there would be the opportunity to not, if like the high schools weren't going back at some point, maybe there would be enough staffing, but I don't know. I think the reality is we just need more resources in the district.
I would agree. Is OUSD's current proposal at all more specific than the ridiculousness they publicized in the news and in their emails? Great question.
So I think we'll be able to share their proposal with members soon. We're still kind of going through it and trying to generate questions and clarify things so that when we do share, we can kind of clarify what our understanding is about what the district means. But yeah, there's a lot of spaces in their proposal that are left very vague, where there aren't real protocols lined out for exactly how things will work. So for example, in our proposal, as hopefully you all have seen, for just nurses in particular, there's a whole series of like, how would nurses do their work inside schools if they were to reopen, if, we had mass testing, tracing, and a manageable or a very low incidence of cases if we were to go back. We've spelled that out in detail. Same thing for speech language pathologists, same thing just for teachers in terms of signage, in terms of numbers in the classroom. Their proposal that we received, I can share, just it's from my viewpoint, doesn't contain a lot of detail. It's very sort of general on the safety question. There is more detail on their sort of phases of learning, which is fine, but like we can't get to those phases until we have a safe condition to return to. So I don't know, what would you say, Jamila?
Yeah, and I would agree that as classroom teachers, we need to be able to know specifically like minutes and what's required and be able to map it out. So we want to make sure that whatever we agree to is very detailed and specific. And I don't think from OUSD we're quite there yet, but that is something that we're keeping in mind. Our next question, in the case of 100% distance learning, will we still have access to our classrooms to get materials? Are teachers, staff expected to work on site during crisis learning, even though students will be off campus? So there's kind of two questions there in one.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like we briefly started talking about that in we've been talking about so many different things as a team. I think it came up briefly, and I've definitely heard that comment from others too. I think one of the bargaining team members, Tim Douglas, had raised that some members had asked that question. I don't know the answer. That's something we have to take back and discuss. On the one hand, I get it. I know for myself personally, just in general outside of the pandemic context, but I think it would be true now, is like I'm much more productive when I get in my classroom in terms of getting things done. I just focus better. It's hard at home. And so I can understand wanting to do that. I guess the worry from my perspective as just an individual, not speaking for the bargaining team, is like, can we like really send that message that the teachers are inside the school doing work and the kids aren't there? I just think that could get complicated, but we haven't talked about it enough. We will bring it back and discuss it and try to figure out what our thoughts are on that. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jamila?
Yeah, and I think we just want to make sure we're safe. So even if some of us do want to go back, we want to make sure that you're going back to environments that are safe, because if more than one teacher is there, we just want to make sure we're safe. So Heath, if you remember, one of the phases that the district has talked about is potentially live streaming your in-person teaching. And so the question is, do you think the district will expect us to do that? And it seems really complicated for younger kids, especially TK and K.
Yeah, I'm seeing this question. We talked about this briefly, that, in a scenario where we were back in the schools, and again, that can only happen if the two criteria are met. The question of maybe some families don't feel safe sending their kids back yet. Maybe they have an immunocompromised family member at home that they're in close contact with, or the student themselves, they can't take that risk. And so, the idea that the teacher would then be giving instruction in school while also live streaming the instruction for the student at home. That seems like that would be kind of, we have concerns about that, I think, is what I would say. I'm trying to remember the exact details of our conversation. We didn't go too much in detail, but the concerns we had raised was around, one, someone having to live stream their class like publicly. That's generally not something teachers are expected to do, like have their teaching be put out there in such a public way. And so I'm not sure exactly what the answer is in terms of we have to, I think, go back and talk about that some more, but the concern has been raised to us as a team, and we are thinking about that and are concerned that that's not something that would really work. I don't know, Jamila, what would you add?
I totally would agree. Yeah, I think it is, as a first grade teacher, that is, it's very complicated.
How would you be, first graders, even if you only had like a group of 10, it doesn't seem like you can just set up a camera and give the instruction like you move around the classroom. It's maybe a little easier for high school, but even then, if students working, I don't know.
It does seem very complicated. Interesting question. Why can't we say all of fall is distance learning so the plan is consistent?
Well, we're not the ones who said that just the 4 weeks are going to be distance learning. That was the district proactively just announcing that. While generally we would agree that, we need to be in distance learning until it's safe, I think the point maybe it's being raised is it could be disruptive to try to start the fall, and then maybe something happens where it seems like it's safe enough to go back and then transition back mid-fall. That's something I think we're looking at. I think maybe just we're balancing that with the reality that if the virus were under control, and if, we had testing and it seemed safe to go back, that we might want to open maybe before the end of fall. It seems like maybe that's very unlikely, unfortunately, given the context that we're living in. But we're not opposed to that position, I would say, but the whole decision around the 4 weeks, which I think is maybe where this is coming from, that was just the district announcing that unilaterally on Friday. We didn't agree to that.
Right. Next question, will OEA be bargaining for common good demands like canceling rent and monthly cash payments to families in Oakland? These are really important for unity between parents and educators.
Yeah, I agree. Before I go into that question, I just wanted to mention that it's possible also that requiring a teacher to create a live stream, back to the question about live streaming, could be a violation of ed code. So that's something we'll also look into. As far as the common good demands, I agree, and I think the team agrees at 100%. We want to push forward the platform of bargaining for the common good demands, like canceling rent, like cash payments to families in Oakland. I would say right now we're still sort of working on some language that's going to also include some stuff around systemic racism and institutional racism. But in the meantime, there is a petition that just went out yesterday that kind of lists out a variety of common good demands that we as a union are advocating for. And so, we are going to work on getting some language into our proposals. We haven't given our whole proposal to the district yet, so we're going to work more on that. And then I guess the other thing to say is that we have to make those demands real by organizing around them in the community, which I know a lot of folks are already doing. There's so many teachers in Oakland who do so many things beyond just the classroom, who really get involved to kind of push things in the community. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I would say about bargaining for the common good.
I agree. And OEA is participating with many other unions across the state to make sure that we're bargaining for common good demands. They affect us all. This next question is something that really relevant to you and I, Heath. What if a student gets sick during the day or gets dropped off at school in the morning and parent doesn't answer the phone?
Yeah, and this is there's some language. We have a language, I feel like, in a few different places in the proposal where we try to address this. One around sort of educating families and not taking a punitive approach to a kid who shows up sick and maybe, had symptoms. But then also, I don't want to start scrolling through our proposal now and forgetting. I think it might be under the nurses section where there's talk about. I think we landed on the language of an isolation room. We had a lot of discussion about how to call the room, but like making sure, again, in the event we're back in person, that there is a dedicated space where someone who's displaying symptoms or somehow information comes out that they tested positive, that there would be a space that they could go to be in isolation or just, safely, safe and comfortable, but away from other individuals in the school until such time that the parent could be contacted and they could be picked up. Yeah, so I think I would say that. And there, if you look in the proposal, there is language around this.
And from our the nurse on our team, we're working to get all service providers the space that they need that is FERPA and HIPAA compliant. Okay. Will OUSD put distancing protocols on the school sites themselves once students and staff return to campus?
And so I'm taking that question to mean around like markers and signs and postings. Yeah, I think yes, that's what our demand is. We're demanding. We have a section in the MOU, that our proposed MOU to the district, that lays out what we believe is necessary in terms of having signs and markers to make sure that there's social distancing happening within a school site. So yeah, I think that's getting at that question.
Yep. Will we have equipment to do distance learning from?
So yeah, we're making, we have a demand, as opposed to the spring MOU where we sort of had more qualified language about making every effort or doing their best. We are now demanding universal access, technological access for everyone, both in terms of equipment and internet access. That's a demand we've put forth, and it makes sense and it's necessary in terms of the context of recognizing that we have to maintain this crisis distance learning. The only way to do that is if everyone has an internet connection and everyone has the proper equipment to kind of engage and participate in the school learning activities.
Right. And this is more about kind of the phases. When schools do reopen and families are given the option to return or to continue distance learning, will teachers also be given that option, especially those of us who are high risk ourselves? Great question.
Yeah, so that we have some language, and I actually have this one, I have a little note where it is like under the school safety and culture, section 8, page 41, there are provisions we're putting forth to create like accommodations for telework for members who have like an underlying medical condition or in close contact with those who have an underlying medical condition. And I'll just proactively say we've been reading the feedback and have heard loud and clear around we didn't put anything specifically around age. We are going to take that feedback back and incorporate that into our demands that, yeah, if people of a certain age, we have to have some protections around teachers who are above a certain age.
What, if so, will the close and reopen plan be for when a school site or sites have recognized persons' contamination with COVID-19?
I just don't know. That's a really tough question. Like, what's the close plan? Like, yeah, I feel like we haven't gotten, I mean, there's probably some language in the MOU that sort of speaks to that, like how that would happen, but I feel like we should probably get back to folks on that one and not speak too specifically, because yeah,
Right.
I don't even know. Yeah, we've been thinking so much about like how do we ensure first that things are safe, and then once they're safe, how would we actually do it inside the classroom? That yeah, we have to also think, I guess, more about what happens. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, yes, of course, there might be incidents where the virus flares up again and then we're forced to shut down. What does that look like? How do we transition back to that context? But we need to do some more talking on our end, I think, before I put out any specific answer.
Right. What would the plan be if a teacher needs to be out and there's no sub? We can't split up classes, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a real concern, and this is why we need to first have the virus under control, because to the extent the virus is under the control, like we're sort of seeing in New Zealand or in places in Europe or South Korea or other places, it seems like if it's not under control, this is exactly what will happen, and it's not clear that there would be any way you could address it. I mean, maybe you would find a sub, but if there was no sub, I don't know what would happen. It seems like, well, then class wouldn't happen that day. It would have to be canceled and the students would be home. Um, I mean, I don't know. I'm just like speculating. That's what I guess would happen. I'm not even sure. But yeah, that's what I would say on that one. And that's why it's so important to first get the virus under control before we kind of are back in the schools.
Right. Yeah, I think the last two questions really speak to how important that first criteria is and the second criteria are, because there are so many things that we're seeing happening in other countries when they reopen that we simply haven't really planned for, and that we really want to spend time working on that. Suppose someone refuses to wear a mask, what would the protocol be?
So I'm pretty sure that the way we've proposed it now, and it's kind of going back to something I said before, is that in the school safety and culture piece, we had kind of written in, we don't want to engage in like a punitive approach, given the context of the long history of Black and brown students being subject of unfair and disproportionate discipline. The school to prison pipeline, I think all of us in Oakland are and should be aware of like that history. We don't want to perpetuate that by like a student doesn't have a mask on and then we're going to like bring down some sort of punishment style discipline that sort of just ends up, I think, would end up criminalizing students of color, to be frank. So the language we have is that we'll work together with the district to generate some sort of mandates, guidelines, and alternatives that would not be punitive, that would be more trying to educate students and families about the importance of wearing masks. And that's something, frankly, I think we have to do just as a society, even in a place like the Bay Area. I think, my own little 2 cents, not speaking as a bargaining team, is more people need to be wearing masks. It's really important to wear your mask. So, yeah.
Yeah, and as speaking as a lower elementary teacher, you really could spend your whole day working on mask wearing. So again, this speaks to our criteria, making sure we have a significant reduction before even considering stepping a foot onto campus, knowing that with little kids, it's going to be really hard to enforce mask wearing. How will highest needs students, families, and schools be put first when it comes to extra resources to support distance learning and an eventual in-person return?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's something we really want to sort of take up as part of our push around common good demands, because it's kind of, that's part of it and how we want to kind of bring to the table and work with the district to have a plan to address, historic and institutional and systemic racism, and then just the inequity that exists in our system. Yeah, we need to make sure that that there are extra resources to support those who really need them. And I think that's something we'll be bringing back and thinking about. So we appreciate that feedback, and we'll definitely work to try to address it in whatever way we can through our demands.
And Heath, we've gotten a couple of questions about if a teacher or staff member is exposed or they test positive, will they have to use their sick time to self-isolate? Will they work remotely? Will there be an alternative system?
Yeah, we have in the MOU a whole sick leave policy. It's on page 41 of the MOU PDF. You can go take a look at that. But the idea is that Not exactly sure how this works legally, but under the CARES Act, it's mentioned in our language that there would be, if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19 or test positive, that yeah, you would be given 2 weeks so you could do the self-isolation that's required. I think that was the question, correct, Jamila? Am I answering?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, just take a look at page 41. You can see the language there.
So this is kind of a big one, Heath. You're doing great. Is strike an option at this point if the district refuses most of our demands?
I would say, I guess, two things is that for any group of workers, a strike is always an option. It's our power to withhold our labor is our right. I believe it's our right, and sometimes it's, we have to exercise that right. But any strike would have to be voted on by membership, and I think it's something that we're not just us, a lot of teachers across the country and across the state are just thinking about, because of the fact that there's been such a failure of leadership to address this issue. And now we're being told, oh, go back into the schools. Though a couple of weeks ago, everyone was praising us and how amazing teachers are and all this stuff. And now, we're coming to the midway in the summer and there's like this sort of demand to go back into the classrooms when it doesn't seem safe. So I would say, yeah, like the strike is always an option, but it's like, it would have to be voted on by the members and we'd have to discuss it as colleagues and with the community together to kind of figure out how and when we might do that.
And this, you might just want to point them to the MOU. Has there been a draft of plans for push in, pull out SPED services?
So let me just look. And we're in the future on some of these, we're hoping to get some of our other colleagues who are a little camera shy to get on here and also talk about some of the other sections and more, because it's like, I'm not an expert in early childhood ed. I'm definitely not an expert in SPED, but if you go to page, just scrolling at social workers, but there's some SPED stuff around the social workers too, some SPED language. I'm just scrolling through the MOU right now to find where the SPED section starts. I think it's like hyperlinked at the top. Yeah, maybe just take a look. I'm not an expert on the SPED stuff. I mean, I've been in the meetings as we've been going over the language, but I feel like I'm not super well versed in talking about it. Here's a special education. It's on page, top of 15. It starts. And so the push in, pull out, there was discussion around, I know that issue around the one-on-one stuff. I don't know where it is though in the language because I'm still trying to internalize all this myself.
Yeah, and I don't know if that question was from a SPED teacher or a parent. So if it's a teacher, I would encourage you to look at the MOU in detail. Our SPED team really went through that, but we would encourage feedback from both parents and teachers as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like the SPED team is answering in the YouTube chat too, so hopefully you're getting some more information.
Perfect. In the MOU, I think it said tech training would be provided for students and parents centrally. Does that mean that the district will hold trainings on how to use the online platforms?
Well, yeah, that's our vision, is that there needs to be some introduction to whatever online platforms are being used, both, maybe centrally. I think there might be some school site based ones I could envision, because, elementary is obviously very, like we've already kind of highlighted, can be very different than high school. So if you're using Seesaw, Jamila, and I was using Google Classroom, and we wanted to have parents kind of be familiar, high school parents be familiar with Google Classroom in more depth, be familiar with Seesaw in more depth, there might be like separate trainings depending. But yeah, that's our vision was, there would be a lot of training and resources for parents to really make the distance learning more meaningful.
Right. I think we learned a lot from the spring, and now we have a lot we can improve upon. And I do think we want to underscore that if we do crisis learning in the fall, which we're really advocating for, we're hoping that we really make it a lot more meaningful for students than it was in the spring. We're really working on that. In the OEA criteria, is testing going to be mandatory for staff or just encouraged? And what language will be in the contract to protect confidentiality?
Yeah, these are good questions. We had a discussion around this. And, you know, there was some bargaining team members who were concerned about making it mandatory. And there were others who I think kind of compared the situation to, you know, school mandated vaccines or other kind of like TB tests. That my sense is that to really be able to go back in person, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's leaning towards it would be mandatory, but I'm not positive. So I don't want to say that and be wrong. So, but we did have some discussion as a team, and we will get back to you with a clearer answer on that because that's an important question. And then, yeah, confidentiality. I think, yeah, we would definitely demand that, yeah, it's confidential, that, yeah, no, if you do test positive, it doesn't get put out there in like a staff email or anything like that. And it's kept, yeah, it's kept confidential. So, there's a question about, just really quick, make sure where the MOU proposal doc is. Um, I mean, it was emailed out, right, Jamila? Where do people find it? Is it
Yeah,
on the?
it was emailed out. If you don't have it, I would recommend, if you are a teacher, if you don't have it, I would recommend contacting your representative, your site rep, and they can send it to you, or any member of the bargaining team can send it to you too. That's my recommendation. And just our last question is something that, one of the reasons that Heath and I are speaking today is really something that speaks to a lot of us. What about teachers who have younger kids? I've lost my daycare spot at this point and can't really prepare because everything is so unknown. However, this will affect me returning to work. We can totally relate. And the one thing I would say that as someone with young kids is that there are multiple members of the bargaining team, including our chair, that have young children, and this is a real issue for us. And we are going to be doing everything we can to work out every scenario to make sure that all our teachers are able to work. Heath, do you want to add anything?
I would just echo 100% what you said. This is not easy, and we understand it's really, really difficult. Like if the schools aren't open, like just for everybody. But yeah, like you just said, Jamila, we're thinking hard about that because we're feeling it too. And we're going to try to figure out some kind of solution to make it workable.
All right, so we're going to wrap up our Q&A. Again, you can always send us more questions and we will answer them in the next live stream. Just to give you next steps, we will resume our talks with the district on Monday. In the meantime, if you have not already, we encourage OEA members to review the MOU and fill out the feedback form so that we can be sure to get your questions and concerns on the document. Thank you to those of you that have responded. Heath?
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, until next time, your negotiations team, your bargaining team, we're ready to fight for the safety of Oakland. We're going to continue to advocate safety as being at the center of any kind of discussion around reopening schools. And so, yeah, with that, thank you for viewing and have a great afternoon.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to put out an FA